Good.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing briefly because of. Now I'm going to share again and start again. Right, well, let's start again. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 20th of our talks in the series. It's also the second, actually, in a series of 3 talks where we're hearing from the 3 latest fellows in the contemporary group. Last month we had Ken Holland, and this month I'm delighted to welcome Alexandra Prescott, who's our deputy chair, and next month it will be Carol Ollerud. But I'm really excited and looking forward to this, Alexandra. So I shall pass it over to you, and you can tell us all about your project.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to share screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to Sean for doing the techie stuff. And most importantly, thank you to everyone who's signed up for this presentation. I hope what I say and the things you see encourage you on your own journeys. So I'm going to cover from where I began a long time ago with analog point and shoots to my F journey and beyond, because I'm a firm believer in Kaizen, the Japanese principle of continuous improvement. So even though I was successful at the F, the journey's not over for me. So let us begin. So there is one of my analog images taken in the Sinai Desert back in 1991 with a point and shoot camera. I suffer from mild dyspraxia, so at the time I wasn't able to get to grips with the exposure triangle, and it did take me a long time. And you're probably asking, what was I doing in the Sinai Desert? Well, for a long time I was an adrenaline junkie, scuba diving instructor, rally driver, skier, and heavily into horses and dressage. And on this particular occasion, I did a diving trek across the desert, stopping off at various jump into the water points. And in between moving from dive site to dive site, this was one of the sites that I saw. It amused me that the guy was on his camel with surround sound. This was taken 1988 in the spring tides at Dartmouth, again an analog point and shoot image. I didn't expect it to turn out like this. In my naivety, I thought it would be lovely and sharp and show everything that was happening, but not to be, not with a point and shoot. And as it happens, I actually quite like this one. I think it captures the mood of the moment fairly well. Onwards to the Kruger Park, because as well as being an adrenaline junkie, I've always had a lifelong interest in wildlife, pets, basically anything that isn't human and walks, talks, breathes, and makes noises. So I was using my camera as a diary accessory, and actually there's nothing wrong with that, but I did eventually grow out of it. Now, I've said before, I was a scuba diving instructor. This is a shot of a boat coming home after a dive. There were 2 boats out there, the one I was on and this one itself. And we had a great day's diving, and I saw a lot of divers around me who'd got underwater cameras, and in typical style, I said to myself, I can do that. So I had a go. Now, this is the SS Thistle. It's a cargo ship that was built in 1940 in the northeast, up where I am, and it was sunk in 1941. And this was my first experience of how frustrating and how difficult underwater photography was. In my naivety, I thought, great, point the camera and the shot will happen. But as you can see, all the sediment has been stirred up on the wreck, and it catches in the flash, in the flash, and shows up, and there's no fixing that sort of thing. This was in the depths of the ship, down in the cargo hold, about 2 holds down. And again, when you get down there, it's pitch black, and you stir up the sediment and it shows up. The flash illuminates it, bounces off it, etc. So I wasn't having a lot of luck. So I decided I would invest in a CNC MX10, which is a really robust underwater camera system. And as you can see, the shots started to improve. Now, this is Kevin the Moray. Kevin lives on the barrier reef in Belize, which is the second largest barrier reef in the world. He's quite used to divers, and he's actually quite big. He's bigger than me, and I was 5'5", and he was quite a benign soul, used to divers feeding him, and as long as you respected his space, he was absolutely great. And truth be known, you want to respect his space, because if you see those 2 front teeth, the 2 little white ones, he's got plenty more like that, and they're all very, very sharp, because of course he's a carnivore. Things were getting better. My photographs hadn't got quite so much sediment in them, and I was managing to catch the fish as they swam around. I really would have liked it if they'd stayed still, but that's not in the nature of fish. And then I had a skiing accident, and the skiing accident did some quite severe damage to my cruciate ligament, and I had a lot of scar tissue after that. Now, the problem with scar tissue, as anyone who dives will tell you, it upsets the decompression tables, and the algorithms just go to rats. And essentially, if you do a lot of diving, you're not safe on the tables anymore. And the consultant basically said I was going to have to give it up. So that was the end of that and my underwater photography. But it didn't stop me, not with photography. I carried on. And this took me up to 2011. And in 2011, I decided to move away from a point and shoot, an Instamatic type camera, and go to a DSLR. And the reason being was that I wanted a long lens, because although I'd practiced my fieldcraft, I'd learned how to sneak up on animals, they were still too far away, because of course they smell you and you see you long before you think they do. So there I am with my DSLR, managing to catch a bit more of the wildlife, but the pictures still weren't saying what I wanted them to say. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll come off auto and I'll go on to manual, and I'll start playing with the settings and see if I can do a bit better. And things did improve, but they still weren't where I wanted them to be. I've seen the pictures by my heroes, Marcel von Oosten, Nick Brandt, Andy Rouse, all producing fantastic wildlife images, and I wanted to be like that too. And I had a thought about it and thought, how do I do this? I know, I'll join the Royal Photographic Society, and I'm bound to learn lots of things there that are going to take me where I wanted to be. And I did that in January 2017, and in March 2017, I went for my L. And I was successful with my L, but the pictures are still birds on sticks, birds in ponds, seals on beaches, and there was still, to my mind, no magic to them. Back to the drawing board, what happens next? At the time, Falmouth University were advertising a 2-year online master's course in contemporary photography. So to pun, I dived in. And I did that because although I'm a natural history photographer, I looked at the syllabus, and from what I could see, it was not only going to teach me photography theory, it was going to teach me a little bit about art theory and give me the background that I hadn't got because to date I'd been self-taught. And it did. They encouraged us to try new genres, and this is one of my attempts at abstract. Not really happy with abstract, but had a go, as you must with all of these things. They asked you to do some commercial work, and I got lucky. I was contracted by an agency who were working with Marks and Spencers at the time to, Marx's were going through an identity crisis. And the work I was tasked with was to go into a store, look at what I liked about the store, photograph it, and look at what I didn't like. So I showed you one of the ones I liked. Close friends will know I'm a bit of a shoe addict, and this captures all those lovely shoes and all those bright colours. And that was one of the things I liked about the store. So that was a little go at commercial work. They encouraged us with our creativity, and all of a sudden I could see that I was moving away from just a portrait of an animal. In this picture, I wanted to capture the gaze of the raptor, and I think I've done that. He's on the right-hand side. The man is the raptor's perch, and he's pretty essential because you wouldn't get the raptor this close like this without the man. But the focus is on those very intense eyes and that very in-your-face expression of the bird. And that was how I wanted the image to look. And I was starting to produce pictures that weren't diary aids. I suddenly realised that I could do things with pictures. I could make pictures that had meanings. And at this point, all the things I believed in conservation, I suddenly could see that rather than just continuing my work as a wildlife volunteer and a conservationist, I could actually start to do some proactive things with my photography to try and move the spirit of conservation forward. And at the same time as getting involved with the meaning of the photographs, which to a lot of people will think, well, so what? But it was new for me. I also started to get really involved, fascinated and interested in vanitas style art. Now, vanitas is the Latin for vanity. And in art, it means in the sense of emptiness or a worthless action. And all of a sudden, the allegories and irony potential of vanitas captured my imagination. And I started to produce images like this. So we have a life-size feather. And the feather actually, in later images, becomes a bit of a signature for me. And we've got the feather and we've got the egg where the bird came from, and we've got the skull from the end of his life. And you can think about what conclusions you'd like to draw from that sort of image. So I worked through the MA. I'm not going to read everything out, but there are some facts and figures here that I'm really proud of. I did a solo exhibition, plus catalogues, website and advertising media. I made 2 handmade photo books. I did a commercial treatment proposal and product shoot for the same. A treatment proposal is a proposal for a product sheet, and for some reason it's called a treatment. Heaven knows why, but there it is. And I did 179 critical research journal entries. They were roughly A4 length, but you are marked on them. Tutorials, lectures, readings, set exercises, artist reviews, exhibition visits. And at the end of the course, my bibliography totaled 24 pages. And I also did a week's residential study course for Adobe. My final major project, it was a public installation called Trophies. Now, an installation is actually an exhibition that takes part of its form and content from the surroundings to create an immersive experience rather than the white gallery space. I was fortunate in that I was working as a volunteer with the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, and they very kindly lent me one of their estate buildings. And the building in question is at Washington, up here in the north, and it's built like a log cabin with lots of glass dividers inside. And when you're sat in there, you're looking out and people are looking in. And it started to remind me of museums. And this is why it became an installation, because I utilised some of those facets in the images themselves. Now, it was called Trophies because I have a huge, huge collection of wildlife artifacts. And I wanted to show those, but I also wanted to show people what we do to animals. And some of my trophies include creatures that have been shot, creatures that have been skinned, all sorts of things. And we've turned the animal into a trophy because we can. And I wanted to show people how wrong that was. And I also produced a theory paper with research-based evidence. So I got through all of this, and in April 2019, I handed the work in. Just stepping back a bit, the image you see here is the front of the final paper, and it shows an otter paw that's been made into a silver brooch. Now, that was from a dog otter. He weighed 22 pounds when he was hunted, and he was killed at Acton Waters. And that's just so sad, so really sad. And a lot of people have asked me, why do I have something like this in my possession? It's wrong, isn't it? It's wrong. But I think that he was killed by people, and to destroy this artifact would be equally wrong, because I can use it in photography and I can use it to show people about the things we do, about the things people do to the rest of the population on the planet. And so he featured in my final major project, and he gave the name to the project itself, Trophies. So it was handed in, and my husband sent me off to India to recover. And when I got to India, I could see that my eye had changed. Before the course, I would have photographed every single one of those tigers as a close-up portrait. But when I saw this scene, I chose to capture it as a scene, because for me, it tells a story. And I hope you see the story. In the background, you've got a cub with huge paws and an even bigger belly. On the left-hand side, you've got another cub. You can't see its belly, but you can just about see that it's having a drink. And in the front on the right, you've got Mum, who's obviously been having dinner too, and she's having a drink. And you can see from the lights that it's towards the end of the day. And this family had obviously eaten, come down to the waterhole, we're having a drink, and then we're going to go to sleep for the night. Now, at the end of the MA, in the final paper, they ask you to say, what project are you going to do next? And during writing the paper, a couple of times I'd been out for local walks in the woods, and it suddenly struck me that when you walk in the woods, everything goes really quiet. And if you don't know your woods very well, you think that the woods are empty and there's nothing in there. But there's an awful lot in the woods. The thing is that most of the things that live in the woods are actually quite small. So when you come tromping through with your size 5s or 10s, they see you, not unnaturally, as a predator, and they scuttle for cover. But there is plenty of life in the woods, and I wanted to show people that evidence through the use of my artifacts. So I decided to do a studio portfolio with three-dimensional pictures of the artifacts themselves. So version 1 of my F project was called Walk in the Woods. And I put together some images like this to try and get together a portfolio. So this was one, and here's a second one. And eventually I got 21 images. Well, I took a whole lot more than that, but I got 21 that I was happy with, drafted up a rough statement of intent and looked around for an advisory day. And I found one down in London in February 2019, on February the 29th. So I flew down to London and showed the people down there my images to see what would happen. And I got some mixed reactions. Half of the people understood it and half of them didn't. And the thing that brought home to me was that something we learnt on our MA, the process of encoding or decoding an image is rooted in social knowledge. And if the people looking at your images don't have the same social knowledge as you, they're not going to understand them. So, mixed reaction. But I did get some really good advice, which has followed me through the rest of the 2.5 years of my F journey. The advice was that my aims and objectives would be key, and to remember that a fellowship is a longer term commitment and development of ideas and clarity. And they suggested that in a few words, or a sentence or two, no more, write down my aims as they currently are. Keep developing the images and keep getting feedback on whether others can see my aims and the few key words or sentences. I needed to develop a clarity between what and how I wanted to show and what I was trying to tell them about the things I was trying to show. They did also remind me that trying to finalise the statement or the image style in isolation was really not going to work. The two needed to be done concurrently. And then COVID landed, and I carried on developing my images, but there was no one to see them apart from my husband, and he shared the same social knowledge that I do. So I booked a one-to-one. Now, my one-to-one, the advisor was really supportive, and he saw what I was trying to do. But after we talked it through, it was back to this social knowledge of the artifacts. And if you don't come from a wildlife background, you weren't going to recognise them. So back to the drawing board. Version 1 was over. Time to think about version 2. Version 2 was still based on my love of vanitas, but the aim had evolved. My artifacts were beautiful, complex, miracles of nature's engineering, and we're damaging it. And that's so wrong and so sad and self-defeating in the end. And I wanted to make people aware of this and to think about it. At this point, there was still no one to share the images with. We were up to our necks in COVID. And I started the peer-to-peer group on Zoom for people on the same journey as me. And we've had a really close community now for over a year. And it was that community that helped me through on my F journey. This particular image, there is some symbolism in it. The little skull on the chopsticks is of a bat. The bat is a Chinese symbol for good luck and health and happiness in feng shui. At the time, we were in the middle of COVID, and it was and is still perhaps believed that COVID came from bushmeat, from wild bats. So it's a bit sad, and you can draw what conclusions you want from that image. I also wrote into my statement of intent for this and the rest of the images in the collection for V2 that they were based in a museum. The lighting would be appropriate to a museum, and the setup, the composition, appropriate to museum. And this dates back to my interest in cabinets of curiosities, which were the precursors to museums. back in the 16th, 17th century, if you were really wealthy, you collected stuff, weird stuff, and you put it in handmade, beautiful wooden cupboards. If you were really rich, you put it in beautiful rooms and invited your friends to come and have a look. And really, really rich, royalty included, you brought in people to make drawings and develop books from your collection of stuff. So you can see where this is going. So here was my metaphorical museum. And in November 2020, I had another advisory. And again, the advisor was very, very supportive. And bar a couple of technical things, he said that the images as a portfolio were ready to submit. So I went away and I corrected the images. And in February 2021, there was an online club advisory day, and I signed up for that. I have to say that wasn't the best experience of my life. And in fact, I'm not going to gloss over it. I found it needlessly, deeply unpleasant and humiliating. When I thought about it afterwards, I'd met an advisor who was lacking in social knowledge as well as social skills. And he obviously didn't read the SOI because he didn't understand the reference to museum lighting and setups and so on and so forth. But I have been very fortunate because, unlike Tennessee Williams' character in A Streetcar Named Desire, I have benefited from the kindness of many strangers, and a lot of those RPS volunteers and RPS members in the peer-to-peer group. And someone popped up and offered to mentor me. Now, a mentor is not someone who says, do this, do that. A mentor encourages you to find your own road, to look at what you're capable of, and he helps you to bring that out. And my mentor said to me, let your imagination run wild for a while. And I did. Now, this particular one was influenced by the Day of the Dead. And I started to think about how you could encourage people to look at images, because I was going to need to make people look, and then when they looked, they could actually look at the meanings, but the challenge was to get them to look. So I started to look at some of the old masters and asked myself what it was about the old masters that had stood the test of time. In today's vernacular, why had they got so many likes over the centuries? And it was down to the fact that they were aesthetically pleasing. And that was the route for me to take. I did wonder how I was going to produce another 19 to 20 images based on old masters. So that theme had to go out of the window, but the root of it was there. And it was emphasized when I did this one. This image was of rather than about, and it's not very inviting to look at, and it wasn't going to support change if no one wanted to look at it. So then I built another pretty set, and I wrote some more about my aims, and it began to make sense. So before we look at the next set, I'm going to take you to my statement of intent, the final statement of intent. This had the objective and underlined the objective of my images, which was to elicit change. So the universal truths of pollution, disrespect, greed, and cruelty affect the creatures with whom we share the planet. This has been the inspiration for this collection of images, which adds my voice to those who work for and support change. My objective is to provoke and inform discussion to elicit change. That was my objective. I have seen species suffer and their habitats deteriorate as the human population overload consumes resources because they can, because culture demands it, because there's no immediate alternative way for some communities to exist. I have created these images as a set of stylized representations of the scenarios and outcomes that I've witnessed in my work as a wildlife conservation volunteer, both in the UK and overseas. The images don't portray all creatures and scenarios, but a sample of those that I've experienced. Art, for centuries, has been a tool for protest, for social change, and I've chosen this tool to represent my voice. The aesthetics of the images are the lure to invite the viewer's attention. Pleasing aesthetics elicit an emotional response and encourage the mind to make a connection. This, combined with the composition style, is an approach constructed to encourage people to see, not just to look. The symbolically informative artifacts have been placed to trigger curiosity, leading to greater understanding, stimulate compassion and increase empathy. The whole concept encouraging behavioural change. If you don't know or understand the consequences of humankind's behaviour, then you have no reason to care or make changes. These images are a tool to encourage the journey to understanding. Balance is easily broken. One indiscriminate action has the potential by degrees to harm a species, disrupt a habitat, and or ultimately hasten extinction for us all. So this was the next set that I built. I made it pretty. I made it a pretty set. And I chose the artifacts deliberately because in my head I was writing a secret message, a second layer of meaning, as well as depicting something that I'd seen. I wanted the picture to be inviting in its own right till you look closer, and that was going to be the pattern for the way forward. Now, hawthorn trees are recognised as symbols of the ability to express yourself in a unique, outstanding way. That's what I wanted to do. And the pheasant depicts an alert person of many resources, and I like to pride myself on being resourceful when I'm not panicking. A lot of my images also have a feather in them. I said earlier the feather was starting to be a signature for me. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart recorded all of the good and bad deeds of a person's life and was needed for judgment in the afterlife. After a person died, the heart, when it was before it was embalmed, was weighed against the feather of Mart, the goddess of truth and justice. So the challenge of secret messages and vanitas irony was adding another layer to my images, making it aesthetically pleasing with a message if you wanted to see it. So in this one, you have a dead pheasant, his foot, the feather for goodness, all displayed in the branches of a hawthorn tree, which represents my way of expressing myself in that hopefully unique and outstanding way. And that was the pattern for all the images in my portfolio. This little chap here was actually carefully glued together from 3 separate bits of crab that I collected over the years. And he's clutching a piece of plastic thread, plastic rope in fact. Now thread symbolized continuity in space and time. And in Greek mythology, the 3 fates spin and measure and cut the thread of life. And for me, this little crab is looking at his plastic rope and wondering about his fate in this contaminated world, in this case, contaminated sea. And in the background, there's a dead starfish, and there's an empty shell, a dead feather, and some driftwood, all pollutants, all result of human misdemeanor. I had a lot of fun with this one. This was done in a huge fish tank. Again, we have a feather, my signature feather, but the feather is also there to denote the sort of bird it is. If you know a little bit about birds, this is a mallet, mallard. And the ironic thing is that the female mallard is a totem of grace and growth and nurturing, and we shoot it for sport. That's just so sad. This is one of my favourite images. Now, I was given the advice, as I said earlier, that F images don't happen overnight. They're a long-term commitment and development of ideas and clarity. And this is evident to me in my favourite images. Why would we steal a miracle of nature, a wild bird's egg, an attempt to enhance its perfection with human art. Now, I tried this setup with a real hand and a jeweler's display hand, and they both detracted from my intended message. And I thought about it some more, and I bought a pair of artist mannequin's hands. And to me, they sum everything up. They're unwieldy and they're made of wood. And they suggested an allegory for the apprentice, the person, stealing and then trying to enhance the master's, Mother Nature's work, the egg. And for me, that sums it all up. The next image, we all recognise this one. The raptor's feet are symbolic of harpy feet. Now, the harpy is an endangered eagle, a bird of prey, and Greek legend has it that the harpy is a winged death spirit, and the mask is a widely understood symbol of the pandemic. So there you have it, a pandemic, people dying, and you must all have seen some of the images of animals being caught up in badly disposed of masks. Now, in this image, my respect for birds just rocketed, and it's also got my signature feather in it. This took me 3 goes to build this nest, and I've got 2 hands, a glue gun, and plenty of materials. The little birds who make their nests have got beaks, feet, and have to fetch a piece of material, put it in, go back and fetch another one. But in the image itself, eggs are universal symbols of life and resurrection. The cotton wool buds, the plastic ones, are polluters. And birds shouldn't be building their nests with our pollution, with our leftovers. This image encompasses the Victorian language of flowers. In that language, the clematis is a signaler of poverty. And my message in this image is that moral poverty is responsible for a good deal of the hunting that happens. The hunting signified by the cartridge, the shotgun cartridge in the roebuck's eye and the flowers around it. And obviously it's a dead roebuck because it's a skeleton. The bees. The bee is an exemplar of ethical virtues. A dead bee, death of virtue. Dead bees on plastic flowers say a lot about how we see our natural resources, things to be abused and used and replaced with man-made stuff. But just remember, no bee food, no bees, no people food. In this image, I wanted to show how, in many respects, technology strangles us. And every time I see a USB cable, because of the way they're designed and function, I see snakes. So I spent a couple of days setting this one up and tying the USB cables up, trying to make the tying up as insignificant as possible, because despite doing my residential course for Photoshop, I'm absolutely useless at it. So I needed to make sure that I had as little stuff to get rid of as possible. And in this one, the IT cables are wrapped around a skull in snake-like positions to show how we're strangling life. Now, this postcard is handmade and it dates from 1906, so it's over 100 years old. And in that time, we were doing some really weird stuff. We didn't know any better, but we were taking animal bits and making other animals with them, which is just so weird. And all I could do with this one was portray the construction of the card, but I think it gets the message home. And again, we have those feathers in there to remind us that our hearts must be good. Rat paws and salt. Bushmeat. bushmeat is not a good thing to be eating, and we knew that in COVID. And again, we've got moral feathers in the background, and there's a feather in the front in the empty eggshell where life came from. This one is probably the hardest of all to understand, but I put it in anyway because it has a lot of meaning for me. Strawberries are a symbol of good and innocence. And the strawberries are protected by a copper snare there at the front. And the rat represents destructiveness and avarice. It's the good protected from the bad. He's actually a preserved pet rat. And he's a lovely little chap, and I use him in quite a few other images. He's dead easy to photograph and very photogenic. But the point of this image is that why are we using a snare to protect good from bad? In my work as a wildlife conservationist, I've been a hedgehog nurse, and I've treated animals who've been caught up in snares, some dead, some alive. And it's heartbreaking. It's not something you ever want to see, especially when they're still alive, because how can you fix it? How can you tell them you're going to fix it? And how can you apologize for what we've done to them? Bird's nest soup. The bird's nest symbolizes prosperity, health, happiness, friendship, and good luck. And it's eaten by some cultures because it's believed to be a health-enhancing food because of its mineral content. I made this one to represent the belief of the health-giving properties of many animal artifacts, or the belief in those health-giving properties. And people will be familiar with the use of tigers in tiger wine, pangolin scales, the rhino horn. And from a bird point of view, in Cuba, for example, there's a bird called the great lizard cuckoo, who's a splendid cuckoo, and his name suggests he eats lizards, but he's becoming not endangered, but he's on the worrying list, because the belief is that if he's boiled up and the water's fed to sick babies, the babies will get better, which is complete and absolute rubbish. Lizard shoes. Now, the lizard is a symbol of resurrections, partly because of its skin shedding habit. And ironically, in this image, the lizard is resurrected as a pair of shoes. This one always makes me laugh when I see it. I have a friend who's an angler, and he's also a very, very professional man at making flies for fly fishing. And I asked him to make me what I called a vanitas fly. I wanted the fly to be large, I wanted it to be gaudy, and I wanted it to be excessive. And he understood what I wanted. He was a bit reluctant at first because he knew it was going into a photograph and he wanted to demonstrate his expertise. But he came round to the idea, and he made me this. And he made it from the feathers of the golden pheasant. So there you have a rock, and you have a fly fishing hook on the end of a bamboo pole, and you have a pheasant looking at the fly fishing hook made of golden pheasant feathers going, what? Rubbish. We do a lot of that, pollution. The little rock in my fish tank supports a weasel, or as you may know him, a weasel tail or an ermine tail. And he's sharing his environment with rubbish. Now, ermine was used as a trimming for court and judicial robes, and ermine signals moral or intellectual purity. So there's a little bit of irony here again. To fish or not to fish. But this is what happens with old tackle, pollution of sorts. Now, the Fly Makers Association, based up in London, are actually looking at this image to use in an advertising campaign to warn fishermen to be a bit more careful with their old tackle. So I'm pleased that another of the images is having some use beyond the F panel. I had a lot of fun building this one as well. But again, the message is about pollution. The seahorse symbolises vulnerability. Now, seahorses, despite having a tough ecoskeleton that protects them from predators, are vulnerable. For every 1,000 seahorses who are born, only one will survive to reach maturity. And humans are their biggest threat. So I popped my seahorses on some weeds made of plastic straws. This one took me a lot of time to do because the straws are glued to a base to get them to stand upright. And if it didn't photograph right, I had to move the straws around. That meant dismantling it. And you can imagine how it went. But the image in the end, I was pleased with. This one uses one of my artifacts. I mentioned the Victorians and how they had this habit of making animals from bits of animals. And this is an antique Victorian clay hummingbird brooch, and he's made with bits of bird. Why would you, when the real thing's out there? And there in front of him, I've popped a dead beetle as well, just to bring the message home. Now, the hummingbird, another hummingbird. The Aztecs believed that the hummingbird was a symbol of rebirth, which is akin to recycling, but not in this way. Birds shouldn't be using our rubbish to make their nests. And the final image of the set. The iris, when it's pictured together with the Virgin Mary, represents grief. So we have an iris. Instead of the Virgin Mary, I've got the skull of an innocent animal, and gloves are used for dirty work. So here you have it. The grief at the death of an animal, and there are dirty hands behind this. So it was all ready to go. I decided I was going to go to Scotland for squirrel watching and forest bathing, because at the end of this lot, we were now at 2 years, roughly 5 months, and I was worn out and probably a bit at the end of my tether. So off I went to Scotland. Now, I mentioned earlier I've been quite enamoured of project planning, and I did a lot of project planning as I worked through the 2.5 years. And when I was up in Scotland, just something made me check the rules and regulations, and the rules had changed. The entries, as it was a print entry, had to be at RPS House 3 weeks in advance of the assessment day, not 2. And I was 4 weeks in advance of the assessment day. So if you do the maths, you'll realise it was time for me to go home quickly. I had a week to get home, and that wasn't hard. A week to box them up, get a courier and get them down to RPS House. At the peer-to-peer group, we have a resource list, and I built in that check the regs as milestones on the project planning template that we offer people. So it got down to RPS House, and I had 3 weeks of peace and quiet, did some other stuff, some other photography, and just tried to relax. And I was probably fairly sanguine about it at this point. There was nothing more I could do. I'd worked my hardest. I'd done everything I could to continuously improve. And the assessment day arrived, and I sat in front of the screen and I watched the assessments ahead of mine, and the advice and the comments was fair. And I got more and more nervous, and then it was my turn. And I sat there and I listened. And the images did what I'd hoped they would do. If you think back to the statement of intent, they were encouraging discussion. And the discussions went on for half an hour. And there was discussion, summing up, discussion, more summing up. And as it went on, I was convinced that I'd failed. And I was already starting to think, okay, what do I do next? Where do I go from here? Resign yourself. You've failed. You're going to have to pick this up. And the chairperson summed up and turned around and she smiled. And I'd got my F. And even now you can probably hear in my voice just what an emotional moment it was and how proud I am that I'd got this far. Now, my husband had always believed in me, and I shot downstairs screaming, I've done it, I've done it, I've done it. And he went to the fridge and opened the champagne, and we sat there and we drank it. And I was just so pleased. And the email arrived, and that was it. I was an F. Now, the journey's not over for me, not by any means. I still find it hard to believe. And it's that continuous improvement gene in me. I want to go on. I want to do more. I want to do better. But there are some universal truths out of this, or if you prefer to call them, lessons learned. Fail to plan, plan to fail. My whole life is run round planning. It needs to be done because otherwise you can't do everything you want to do. The process of encoding or decoding an image is rooted in social knowledge. Bear that in mind, and it's something I think about every time now I make a photograph. Are people going to understand what I'm trying to say? And the F is a long-term commitment, and it's a development of ideas and clarity. My F took me 2.5 years. I'm not a bit sorry that it took me 2.5 years. Everything I learned over that 2.5 years is a positive progression for me. And I would urge anyone doing that journey to take your time to think about things, to think about that continuous improvement, how you can do better and how you can refine those ideas and that clarity. So that's me. I really, really hope, because everybody's signed up and you spent 55 minutes or so listening to me talk about my images, I hope that there was some stuff of value to you. And I guess now is the time for questions. So thanks for attending. Just a quick reminder that Carol is next one up on the 24th of the 4th, and you will really enjoy her images. So I'm going to come off share screen now and hand back over to Alan.
Leave it up. Oh, I'm going to say just.
Oh, sorry.
But don't worry.
That's okay. So, Alexandra, for me, 2.5 years actually sounds really quite quick.
What can I say? It seems like a lifetime.
Yes, yeah, but yeah, I think that's really quite quick, really. I think perhaps other people who are on their F journey might have already spent a lot more than that in time. But to the question, so Ken has a good question. It's really about those artifacts. You've got such a lot of artifacts, different kinds of artifacts. Did you go out looking for them with them in mind for making the images, or did you already have this mountain of stuff to choose from?
A bit of both. I've been collecting artifacts since I was a child. So some of the stuff that you would think is antique, when I bought it, it was just vintage. When I was given it, some of it I inherited. I've got a lot of animal-based jewellery that I inherited. Some of it I found. Because I'm a wildlife natural history photographer, I have a lot of contacts with rangers, the old world gamekeepers, people like the fly fishermen, and whenever they find something that they think that might be useful, they ring me up or email me, and they get it to me. So I have a huge collection. This is my metaphorical cabinet of curiosities. I'm not wealthy enough to have a specific decorated room. They won't all fit in my little wooden antique cupboard. So they're all in boxes, display shelves, and you can see some of them behind me laid out here, and there's a whole load more in the other room, in the studio room.
Yeah, really interesting. So Ken asked a follow-up question: has doing your F changed you as a photographer?
Yes, definitely. It's almost made me a bit split personality, because I have on one side of me what I would call the chocolate box pictures, and those are the pictures that a lot of people like. So I take a lot of pictures of fluffy, pretty squirrels. I like them. They relax me, and they've got individual personalities, and I do take a lot of them. And I have a squirrel community that I've been following for 7 years now, so I know them all individually. And I also try and take pictures that have meaning. The chocolate box images I sell. I sell those on postcards and as pieces of art for people's rooms. The other stuff, the stuff that I think about with meaning, those are for my own satisfaction, and now and again they get used by conservation organisations.
Mm-hmm. So I actually had a sort of question of my own around that. So you mentioned about the image with the fishing hooks being used for an educational purpose. So how, and another earlier comment you made was about how do you make people see your images? So it's a sort of a twist on that. You made an image which is really eye-catching, fabulous for the F panel, but then how did you get it into what's, well, I was going to say commercial, but you're probably not doing it from a commercial basis, but into a more commercial setting, from the F to that world.
It's done through a couple of routes. Through friends who know I'm doing this sort of stuff, so they'll come to me and say, have you thought of? And also when I'm working with some of the conservation organisations, they'll have a theme on the go, and I'll go and create something, or I've already done it, and say, would you like this? And I must say that most of this work I give away. My chocolate box stuff, 10% of any profits actually go to conservation organisations, and the stuff that I give away because that's my way of putting back. I can't always go out and clear up pollution and things like that, but we all serve in different ways.
Yeah, that's really good. So Susie asks the question, what will your next project be? And will you be looking at communicating a different message?
It will still be a conservation message. The next project is already on the go. I'm just working out ways. I'm trying different setups, to coin a phrase, and it's about pollinators.
Right. Yeah, really important. Yeah, pollinators are mission critical right now.
Oh, really, really mission critical.
Yeah, that's good. So let's have a look. Oh yeah, it's a really good question from Ashwin. So, the process of encoding and decoding relies upon social knowledge. You made that point very clear. I think that's really important especially for contemporary panels. So it's the sort of rider to that is, does that mean that projects based on different cultures have no chance of recognition?
Gosh, I think that's a really difficult question for me to personally answer. What I would say is that my husband and I are heavily involved in the wildlife scenario. So when I produce a really pointed wildlife composition, he instantly recognises what it is. If I show that to a friend who's not involved in that environment, they quite often have troubles trying to decipher the message. Now, if you produce images that have messages according to specific cultural beliefs, I guess it depends on how widely understood those cultural beliefs are.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Or indeed misunderstood, of course.
Or misunderstood, yes, absolutely misunderstood.
But I think you maybe hit the the nail on the head earlier on when you talked about your scope, your statement of intent. If you're going to display a set of images that require that social knowledge and decoding, you can push that in the direction you want with your statement of intent. And of course, in contemporary, we have 300 words available to us rather than the 150 that you get in many of the others. Do you think that's should that be enough? Would that be enough?
Sorry, I'm having trouble turning off the timer here, which is what the beeping is. I had a timer on the go to make sure I kept to with. Throw
it out the window, Alexandra.
I'll just put it in a drawer and then you won't hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, gosh, that is so distracting. Sorry.
Go back.
I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, the statement of intent and the 300 words, you still can't get a lot into that statement of intent. And one of the things that the advisor said was that your statement of intent shouldn't be a descriptor. The statement of intent should be expressing what it is you're trying to achieve, not a description of the images. Does that make sense?
Certainly does. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got a good question from Robert here. Is since he got his A, he's finding it a bit difficult to find enthusiasm for going out and taking pictures again. Any suggestions? Things that could drive him forward.
Yes, and I'm part of a couple of online forums where we're regularly asked that question. And my advice is this. When you reach that, your mojo has gone, you don't know what to do, you can't motivate yourself to get out there and photograph something. Take your camera, go out and set yourself a target. It might be just photograph the tree in front of the house. It might be walk down the street, find a car and just take photographs of the car, but set yourself a target. And you might not like it, but once you get out there, and I've found once you get out and get stuck in, when you finish that little assignment, your mojo will start creeping back. And if nothing else, it will start creeping back because you hated photographing the car and now you want to go and photograph some flowers. But it's that sort of self-discipline that will carry you forward. And we've all been there, believe you me. There were times when working through my F and I got up in the morning and thought, the plan requires me to do this. And I've just got no motivation, I've got no inspiration. But self-discipline says, go in and do it. And okay, what I produced that work was rubbish. That day was rubbish work. But it gave me the lift to go on next day and find some enthusiasm.
Yeah, sounds very positive approach. I've got one last question here. So you talked about getting feedback. Now, feedback's really hard. You're trying to find critical friends. Where do you find your critical friends?
Your critical friends will probably be your best friends because they're the most honest. Your critical friends will be the friends who share your interests. And in my case, the critical friends were some of the people in the peer-to-peer group who gave me the benefit of their expertise and their thoughts. Now, just because you get some advice doesn't mean you have to take it. It's up to you whether you take it or not. You need to go away and think about it. And that's what I did, is I went away and think about it. I can often be the world's worst at saying, I don't agree with that advice, but then you have to ask yourself, well, why did you ask for the advice? So at least think about it.
Yeah. That's been very good, Alexandra. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for signing up. And hopefully I'll see you all at Carol's.
Well, yeah, you keep advertising it before I get to it, Alexandra.
Sorry, I was trying to. Oh no, it was Carol's.
Yeah, don't worry. Well, just to say once again, everybody else, we've been getting wonderful comments saying thank you very much for an inspiring set of images and a great description of your project and the thinking behind it. And I think that it's probably made a lot of us think a bit more about how we approach our photography. And I think that's been an absolutely wonderful insight into your photographic journey. I've got an invitation, which Alexandra's already said. It's on the 25th of April, and it's the third of our latest batch of fellows in the contemporary group, and it's Carol Ollerud, and she's going to be talking about 18 Days, a Time of Great Sadness. And if you've seen Carol's work in the Contemporary Journal, you'll realize this is a very affecting piece of work. It's a wonderful piece of work, but I'm looking forward to that, and that's available now on our website. And we've got another set of talks coming up, which we'll soon be advertising. So thank you very much again, Alexandra. It's been a great evening. It's been a pleasure to watch you, and I have to say that we started off with 40 on the call, and we ended up with 37, I think, at the very end. So quite often it drops quite dramatically throughout the image, throughout the talk. So you've kept everybody's attention very, very well. So thank you for that, and thank you, everybody. And I'll say good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody, and enjoy the journey.